On the night before Thanksgiving, my sister called to erase me from our family. My crippling medical debt was simply too ugly for her elite in-laws. By throwing me into the freezing dark, she unknowingly pushed the first domino that would shatter her precious empire. 10 years later, she strutted into my wedding venue to mock me one last time, only to realize she had just walked into a $50 million financial coffin I built for her. Welcome back to Maya Revenge Stories. My wonderful listeners, unfortunately, YouTube has completely disabled our channel's monetization, leaving us with zero budget to keep operating. If you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our hardworking team to cover their living expenses and continue creating these stories for you. You can easily donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen, or by clicking the PayPal link down in the description or the pinned comment. Now, let me tell you the story of Brinley Lawrence. I was 24 years old, sitting on the bare floor of a drafty, run-down apartment in the forgotten outskirts of Connecticut. The bitter November wind rattled the thin glass of my single-pane windows, creating a sharp and painful contrast to the sprawling, heavily heated estates just a few towns over, where the East Coast elite were busy preparing their lavish holiday feasts. I rubbed my hands together, trying to generate even a fraction of body heat, but the cold seemed to seep directly into my bones. I had just emptied my bank account, transferring the very last pennies I owned to the hospital billing department. It was a desperate, exhausting attempt to chip away at the crushing mountain of medical debt left behind after my father passed away. I was completely depleted, both physically and spiritually. My stomach ached fiercely from hunger, and my fingers were completely numb from the freezing air. But I took a tiny shred of comfort knowing I was doing right by the only parent who ever actually loved me. The sudden, harsh ring of my phone shattered the quiet isolation of the room. I looked at the screen. It was my older sister, Chloe. I answered it quickly, holding on to a foolish hope that maybe she was calling to coordinate what time I should arrive for Thanksgiving dinner tomorrow. Instead, her voice dripped with the kind of polished, casual contempt reserved for stepping in street garbage. "Brinley, I am calling to let you know that plans have changed," she stated flatly, her tone devoid of any sibling affection. "You are no longer invited to Thanksgiving dinner. Julian's parents are flying in from Silicon Valley early. The Vance family are major tech investors, and everything in our house has to be absolutely perfect." Before I could even process the cruel rejection, I heard the rustle of the phone being snatched away. My mother, Eleanor, came on the line. "Listen to me very clearly, Brinley," my mother snapped, her voice sharp and cutting like glass. "Julian is on the verge of securing a multi-million-dollar investment deal with his family tonight. Your pathetic, loser appearance and your depressing aura will completely ruin the luxurious aesthetic of the evening. You are strictly forbidden from showing your face at this house. Do not even think about driving up to the gate." I tried to speak, trying to remind them that I had sacrificed everything for Dad's care while they did absolutely nothing. But my mother was not finished delivering her blows. "And since we are clearing the air," she continued with chilling calmness, "you should know that Chloe and I sold your father's old house last month. We needed the capital immediately to fund Julian's new startup venture. You are entirely on your own with those medical bills. Do not call us again." The line went dead. The silence in my freezing apartment felt suddenly heavier, suffocating me in the dark. They had sold the house, my father's sanctuary, the very place I grew up in, and the only valuable asset that could have wiped out the medical debt. They sold it to finance the vanity business project of a man Chloe was not even married to yet. They had left me to drown in a sea of debt, purposely pushing me under the water. I sat there in the dark shadows of my living room, but the tears never came. The sheer magnitude of their betrayal bypassed any normal human sadness and went straight into a hollow, icy clarity within my chest. I realized in that exact second that I had no family. I was entirely alone in this world, but staying in this freezing room meant freezing to death, both metaphorically and literally. I needed warmth, and I needed to keep moving. I wrapped myself tightly in my father's oversized wool coat, stepped out into the biting winter air, and started walking. I walked for over 1 hour through the icy, desolate streets until I saw the glowing neon sign of a community tech hub, a 24-hour makerspace located downtown. It was a known haven for insomniacs, broke college students, and tonight, it was a sanctuary for me. I pushed through the heavy glass doors, instantly greeted by the steady hum of computer servers and the glorious rush of central heating. I found a quiet, dimly lit corner near the back of the room and sat down at an empty workstation. The computer monitor was still awake, left behind by whoever had been sitting there hours before. It displayed massive blocks of complex, open-source algorithmic code, littered entirely with flashing red error warnings. My father had taught me how to read computer code before I even knew how to ride a bicycle. It was a natural talent my mother and sister had relentlessly mocked and violently suppressed, forcing me into dead-end administrative temp jobs just to pay our daily bills. But looking at the glowing screen right now, the logic felt like a forgotten second language waking up inside my brain. The errors in the sequence were glaringly obvious to me. Without thinking, I reached out for the mechanical keyboard. I began to type, swiftly fixing the broken syntax, reshaping the tangled logic loops, and completely losing myself in the rapid rhythm of the keystrokes, in the freezing depths of that cold Thanksgiving Eve. My mother and sister thought they had finally buried me in the dirt. They did not realize I was a seed, and they had just planted me in the exact environment where I would inevitably grow into a monster. The fluorescent lights above hummed a low, monotonous drone, a steady soundtrack to my intense focus. I sat perfectly still for what must have been 6 hours, my eyes locked on the monitor, the lines of code reflected in my pupils like digital rain. This was not a simple algorithm. It was a labyrinth of predictive modeling, intricately designed to handle massive data sets without collapsing under its own weight. I typed relentlessly, dismantling the bloated architecture and weaving a sleeker, far more aggressive path for the data to travel. The makerspace had emptied out hours ago. It was just me, the rhythmic clacking of the mechanical keys, and the deep shadows stretching across the concrete floor. But as I finalized the last sequence, a strange sensation prickled the back of my neck. The hairs on my arms stood on end. The feeling of isolation vanished, abruptly replaced by the heavy, undeniable weight of being watched. I stopped typing. The sudden silence in the room was deafening. I slowly turned my head toward the darkest corner of the lab, where a row of offline servers created a solid wall of shadows. A figure stepped out from the darkness. My breath caught in my throat. It was an older woman, perhaps in her late 60s. She wore a faded gray cardigan over a plain turtleneck, her silver hair pulled back into a messy bun, held together by a wooden pencil. She looked exactly like a retired librarian who had gotten lost on her way to the archives, but her eyes completely betrayed that disguise. They were sharp, analytical, and completely devoid of warmth. They were the eyes of a predator assessing a very interesting piece of prey. "You completely bypassed the secondary firewall protocol," the woman said. Her voice was raspy but commanded absolute authority. "Most people try to force their way through it. You starved it of data until it shut itself down. Why?" I blinked, my adrenaline spiking. I had no idea who she was. But the question demanded an answer. "Because forcing a system creates friction," I replied, my voice remarkably steady. "Friction creates heat, and heat damages the core. If you cut off the fuel supply, the obstacle eliminates itself. It is simple logic." The woman walked closer, her worn leather shoes making no sound on the floor. She stared at the screen, analyzing my finalized code. A faint, almost imperceptible smirk touched the corner of her lips. "My name is Margaret," she said softly, "and for the past 30 days, a team of 20 senior software engineers has been trying to solve that exact sequence. They called it impossible. They told me the parameters were completely flawed. You just rewrote the entire foundation in a single night." I stared at her, the pieces slowly snapping together in my mind. This was not a random error left on a public computer. This was a trap, a highly sophisticated test disguised as digital trash. Margaret was not a librarian. She was a ghost. I recognized her face from an obscure financial article I had read years ago. She was the anonymous founder of one of the largest renewable energy tech conglomerates on the East Coast. She operated entirely in the shadows, controlling billions of dollars in assets without ever stepping in front of a camera. "Why are you here?" Brinley, Margaret asked, her gaze piercing right through me. "A girl with your level of architectural vision should be resting in a luxury penthouse, not freezing in a public tech hub on Thanksgiving." I did not flinch. I did not soften my voice or try to paint myself as a victim. I told her exactly what had happened just hours ago. I told her about the medical debt, the sold house, the crushing rejection, and the multi-million-dollar vanity project my sister and mother had chosen over my survival. I laid out the facts as coldly as the code I had just rewritten. Margaret did not offer me a single ounce of pity. There were no comforting words or sympathetic sighs. Instead, the predatory gleam in her eyes intensified into a blinding spark. She did not see a broken girl. She saw a weapon that had just been sharpened by betrayal. "Family is a biological accident," Margaret stated, reaching into the deep pocket of her cardigan. "Loyalty is a currency, and right now, your bank account is entirely empty. That makes you dangerous. It makes you hungry." She pulled out a sleek, matte black keycard. There were no logos, no names, just a tiny embedded microchip. She placed it deliberately on the desk right next to my keyboard. "There is a building in the financial district. The address is encoded on this card," Margaret instructed, her tone dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Be there at 7 a.m. sharp tomorrow. You are done fixing broken things for free. I am going to put you through a corporate training program that will push you to the absolute brink of your sanity. It is life or death in the business world. Brinley, you will learn how to manipulate markets, how to weaponize data, and how to destroy your enemies so thoroughly that they will thank you for the privilege." She turned around and began walking back into the shadows. "Take the card, and you leave that pathetic, rejected girl behind forever," Margaret called out over her shoulder. "Walk away, and you can go back to freezing in the dark." I did not even hesitate. I reached out and grabbed the black card. The smooth, cold plastic felt like a loaded gun in the palm of my hand. The old Brinley Lawrence died right there on that cheap plastic chair. I was no longer a victim. I was stepping into a ruthless new universe where power was measured exclusively by data, and mercy was a concept I had officially erased from my vocabulary. 10 years is a lifetime in the technology industry. For me, it was a complete metamorphosis. I am now 34 years old. I do not exist on any public executive board. My name yields 0 search results on the internet. Yet, I am the Shadow Chief Executive Officer of Etherion Dynamics. We do not just participate in the global market, we dictate it. We control the critical microchip supply chain for half the civilized world. We decide which hardware startup becomes a unicorn and which legacy corporation bleeds out into bankruptcy. Power, true power, is entirely invisible. I built my empire behind 20 complex layers of shell companies, offshore trusts, and legally impenetrable non-disclosure agreements to the outside world, and specifically to my biological family. I am still the pathetic failure they discarded in the cold. They firmly believe I am grinding away as a low-level data entry clerk, surviving on minimum wage and expired coupons. I let them believe it. A ghost has the ultimate tactical advantage. Julian Vance, my esteemed brother-in-law, did not fare nearly as well. From the outside, his tech firm looked like a Silicon Valley titan, polished and unstoppable. On paper, it was a decaying corpse. I had my intelligence division pull his financial dossiers. Julian was drowning in toxic debt. His massive vanity project had a catastrophic cash burn rate. He had leveraged everything, taking out massive bridge loans at predatory interest rates. He was exactly 90 days away from total liquidation. His only potential lifeline was securing a massive microchip component contract to fulfill his outstanding hardware pre-orders, a contract that only Etherion Dynamics could legally provide. He was desperately negotiating with my proxy executives, begging for a supply line. He had absolutely no idea the executioner holding the axe was the very sister-in-law he banned from Thanksgiving dinner a decade ago. The phone on my desk rang. It was a blocked number, but my internal security system instantly decrypted the caller identification. It was Chloe. 10 years of absolute silence, broken on a random Tuesday afternoon. I stared at the flashing light, took a slow breath, and answered. "Hello?" I said evenly. "Brinley. It has been forever. I was just thinking about you," Chloe chirped. Her voice was exactly the same, shrilly, draped in fake sweetness, and dripping with an underlying tone of superiority. I let the silence hang over the line. I knew she could not handle silence. She immediately pivoted to the real reason for the call. She did not care how I was doing. She wanted an audience. "Julian is hosting a massive launch party at his corporate headquarters this weekend," Chloe continued, her words tumbling out in an eager rush. "It is going to be the event of the season, hundreds of millions of dollars in the same room. I know you do not get to see things like that in your world. Anyway, our catering company is short-staffed for the exclusive VIP lounge. Since you are probably struggling with inflation, I talked to the manager. I can get you a gig serving drinks behind the scenes. I will pay you $300 in cash. Consider it a favor." $300, a rounding error on my daily espresso budget at the corporate office. She was offering me crumbs to parade me around as her personal charity case. "I accept," I replied, keeping my voice completely devoid of emotion. "Send me the service entrance address." I hung up the phone. The game had officially begun. 2 days later, I stood in the VIP lounge of Julian Vance's towering glass headquarters. I wore a stiff, black server uniform. My hair was pulled back tightly. I held a heavy silver tray loaded with glasses of vintage champagne. The room smelled of expensive cologne, roasted truffles, and desperate arrogance. Chloe and my mother, Eleanor, held court in the center of the room. They wore ridiculous designer gowns, heavily draped in diamonds that my financial analysts confirmed were leased for the night. They were playing the role of royalty on a sinking ship. I approached their circle with measured, silent steps. I kept my eyes perfectly blank, playing the part of the invisible servant. I stepped forward to pour the champagne. Chloe noticed me immediately. She smirked, turning to her circle of wealthy friends. "Oh, everyone, this is my little sister, Brinley," Chloe announced loudly, making sure the entire group stopped talking to look at me. "She works in data entry downtown. We try to help her out with little odd jobs like this when she cannot quite make her rent payments." Eleanor let out a sharp theatrical sigh, swirling her wine glass. "It is a tragedy, really. But some people simply lack the genetic drive for success. We have tried to guide her, but you cannot force ambition into someone who is comfortable at the bottom. Just keep the glasses full, Brinley, and try not to spill on the imported rugs." The group laughed. It was a hollow, ugly, synchronized sound. 10 years ago, those words would have shattered me. Now, I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no humiliation. You do not feel angry at insects right before you step on them. I simply nodded, poured the golden liquid, and faded seamlessly back into the background, watching them drink to their own impending ruin. At midnight, the party began to wind down. I was assigned to clear the empty glasses from the executive suites on the top floor. Julian's private office was unlocked. He was arrogant, trusting his physical security guards over strict digital discipline. I slipped inside and closed the heavy oak door behind me. The room was massive, lined with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. I walked directly to his primary workstation. I pulled a small, encrypted titanium flash drive from my pocket. It took exactly 45 seconds to bypass his incredibly rudimentary internal firewall. I did not steal a single piece of data. I did the exact opposite. I left something behind. I planted a carefully corrupted data file deep within his legal and research archives. It was a digital breadcrumb trail, a perfect, irresistible piece of bait designed specifically for a desperate man. The file contained highly classified, heavily redacted intelligence regarding an old, forgotten patent. a patent originally filed by my late father decades ago. On the surface, the documents made it look like this obscure patent was the missing legal key required to manufacture the exact microchips Julian desperately needed to save his company from bankruptcy. It looked like a golden ticket, a miraculous stroke of luck sitting right in his lap, completely legally unattached to any major corporation. I pulled the drive out, wiped my digital fingerprints from the server log, and quietly exited the office with my tray of dirty glasses. I walked out of the towering building and into the cold night air. I unbuttoned the cheap catering collar and tossed it into a trash can. A black armored town car pulled up to the curb. My security detail opened the door. I slid into the quiet luxury of the leather seat. I looked back through the tinted window at the illuminated penthouse of Julian's headquarters. The trap was set. I knew exactly how Chloe, Eleanor, and Julian operated. Their arrogance was vast, but their greed was bottomless. They would run their routine system checks tomorrow. They would find the file. They would see the patent, and instead of questioning why it was there, they would swallow the poisoned bait whole. Exactly 3 days later, the trap snapped shut. My intelligence division intercepted a frantic burst of encrypted emails from Julian Vance's executive suite. He had found the data file. He had taken the bait. In his desperate, clouded mind, my late father's forgotten blueprint was not a piece of useless history. It was the Holy Grail. My proxy negotiators at Etherian Dynamics had explicitly told his legal team that morning that we could only supply the critical microchips if his company possessed a specific, proprietary architectural patent, a patent he now believed was sitting right in his family's lap. He sent his attack dogs to fetch it. I was sitting in my secondary residence, a carefully curated, run-down studio apartment on the edge of the city that I maintained strictly for cover. The paint was peeling, the radiator hissed a weak, pathetic tune, and the furniture was sourced entirely from cheap thrift stores. It was the perfect stage. The heavy pounding on the thin wooden door was aggressive and impatient. Before I even turned the deadbolt, the door shoved open, forcing me to step back. Chloe and my mother marched into the cramped space. They looked completely absurd, wearing tailored wool coats and clutching designer handbags while wrinkling their noses at the faint smell of bleach and old wood. "God, this place is entirely depressing," Chloe announced, scanning the tiny room with sheer disgust. "I do not know how you live like this. Brinley, it smells like failure." Eleanor did not even bother taking off her leather gloves. She stepped forward, her eyes locked onto me with the same predatory glare she had 10 years ago. "We are not here to socialize. We are here to clean up another one of your father's useless messes." Chloe reached into her expensive bag and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. She threw them onto my cheap particle board kitchen table. The papers landed with a heavy thud. "Sign this," Chloe demanded, tapping her perfectly manicured fingernail on the bottom signature line. "Julian's legal team was doing a routine audit and found some absolute garbage patent your father filed decades ago. It is completely worthless, of course, just a bunch of outdated technical jargon. But unfortunately, your name is still listed as a secondary beneficiary on the estate, which is causing an annoying administrative delay for Julian's corporate restructuring." I looked down at the papers, widening my eyes and forcing my hands to tremble slightly. I needed to give them the exact reaction they expected from a terrified, broke woman. "I do not understand," I whispered, letting my voice crack perfectly. "If it is worthless, why do you need me to sign it away? Why are you both here?" Eleanor stepped closer, invading my personal space, towering over me with sheer intimidation. "Do not try to play smart, Brinley. It does not suit you. We are offering to take this liability off your hands. Chloe is willing to generously compensate you for the inconvenience. $2,000 in cash, right here, right now." Chloe pulled a crisp white envelope from her coat pocket and tossed it next to the documents. "That is more money than you make in a month. Brinley, think about it. You can finally buy some decent groceries. Maybe pay your heating bill so you do not freeze in this pathetic little box." I shook my head, stepping back, wrapping my arms around myself defensively. "No, That is the only thing Dad left that has my name on it. I do not want to sell it. I want to keep it." Chloe's fake smile instantly vanished, replaced by a vicious, ugly sneer. "You do not have a choice, you little idiot. You are going to sign over 100% of your ownership rights to me right this second. If you do not, I will personally make sure Julian's lawyers drag you into a probate lawsuit that will drain every single penny you have. We will destroy your credit score. We will have you evicted from this filthy apartment. You will be living on the street by the end of the week. Now pick up the pen and sign the damn paper." I let out a ragged gasp, forcing a heavy tear to spill over my eyelashes and roll down my cheek. I looked at my mother, silently begging for help. Eleanor just stared back with eyes like two black stones. "Sign it," Eleanor commanded coldly, "and be grateful we are even giving you a single penny." With a shaking hand, I picked up the cheap plastic pen from the table. I let out a soft, defeated sob as I pressed the ink to the paper. I slowly, deliberately signed my name, legally transferring 100% of the intellectual property and all its associated liabilities directly into Chloe Vance's name. Chloe snatched the documents off the table before the ink was even dry. A massive, triumphant smile spread across her face. She looked at her mother, their eyes sparkling with the shared thrill of a successful robbery. They honestly believed they had just stolen the ultimate gold mine. They believed they had secured Julian's path to becoming a billionaire, leaving me in the dirt once again. "Enjoy the $2,000, Chloe sneered, turning toward the door. "Do not spend it all in one place." They walked out, letting the door slam shut behind them. The loud click of the lock echoed in the quiet room. The second the sound faded, my entire demeanor shifted. The trembling in my hands stopped instantly. I reached up and calmly wiped the single tear off my cheek. A slow, terrifying smile curved on my lips. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my encrypted phone. I dialed my chief legal counsel at Ethereum Dynamics. He answered on the first ring. "The transfer is complete," I said, my voice completely smooth and dripping with ice. "Chloe Vance is now the sole legal owner of the patent. Initiate the secondary protocol." "Understood, ma'am," the deep voice of my lawyer replied. "The federal authorities have been notified." What Chloe and Julian did not know, and what their rushed, sloppy legal team failed to uncover, was that my father's patent was not just a blueprint, it was an active weapon. That specific piece of intellectual property was currently the center of a massive, sealed federal antitrust and environmental violation lawsuit. The penalty for the violations attached to that patent was exactly $50 million. By forcing me to sign that document, Chloe had not stolen a gold mine. She had just legally attached a $50 million federal bomb directly to her own Social Security number, and whoever held the title when the music stopped was going to bear full criminal and civil liability. The countdown had officially started. 2 weeks later, 2 separate pieces of correspondence arrived at the Vance household. The first was a thick, cream-colored envelope addressed directly to Chloe and Eleanor. Inside was a wedding invitation. My wedding invitation. The location listed on the embossed card was a breathtaking, sprawling coastal estate valued at tens of millions of dollars, situated firmly on the most exclusive private cliffside in the entire state. The second piece of correspondence was an urgent, heavily encrypted digital summons sent directly to Julian's executive inbox from the legal department of Ethereum Dynamics. It demanded his immediate presence at a mandatory final merger signing ceremony. The address listed on the corporate summons was exactly the same as the address on my wedding invitation. Did Julian find this suspicious? Absolutely not. His arrogance completely blinded his basic logic. In his desperate, greedy mind, he formulated a perfectly delusional explanation. He convinced himself that Ethereum Dynamics, a massive global conglomerate, simply owned the estate and was hosting a lavish corporate gala to celebrate their new partnership. As for my wedding being at the exact same address, he simply assumed I had scraped together my pathetic savings to rent out the servant quarters, a dusty storage barn, or a tiny patch of the backyard garden on the very edge of the property. To him, it was just a hilarious, pathetic coincidence. He was going to the main house to become a billionaire, while his worthless sister-in-law was getting married in the mud out back. The morning of the event, the Vance household was a chaotic whirlwind of pure, unchecked narcissism. They were preparing for a royal coronation. Julian wore a custom-tailored Italian tuxedo, slicking his hair back with the greasy confidence of a man who believed he had just outsmarted the entire financial sector. Eleanor draped herself in heavy, suffocating layers of velvet and expensive pearls, practicing her elitist smile in the mirror over and over again. But Chloe took the absolute crown for pure malice. She did not just dress up. She deliberately weaponized her wardrobe. She chose a breathtaking, floor-length, sparkling white couture gown. It was undeniably a wedding dress. She planned to walk into whatever cheap, rented tent I was using, stand directly next to me, and completely humiliate me on my own wedding day. She wanted to ensure that every single photograph of me would be ruined by her blinding, expensive perfection. She wanted to make me feel small one last time before she officially joined the billionaire class. At precisely 3 o'clock in the afternoon, their rented luxury limousine pulled up to the massive wrought iron gates of the coastal estate. Chloe, Julian, and Eleanor stepped out, radiating a toxic, overwhelming aura of self-importance. They sneered at the heavily armed private security guards stationed at the entrance. Julian snapped his fingers at the valet, tossing his coat without even looking to see if the man caught it. They marched up the sweeping marble steps of the main entrance, their chins held high, absolutely certain they were about to ascend to the ultimate peak of the American elite. Julian pushed open the towering double doors, entirely expecting to be greeted by corporate lawyers holding silver trays of champagne and thick leather binders filled with billion-dollar contracts. Chloe adjusted her sparkling white gown, ready to demand directions to the cheap backyard tent so she could go laugh at the poor bride before her husband's business meeting began. They stepped boldly over the threshold, but their smug smiles instantly froze. There were no corporate banners, there were no whiteboards, no negotiation tables, and absolutely no signs of a business merger. Instead, they found themselves standing at the back of a magnificent, cathedral-like grand hall, entirely transformed into a scene of overwhelming, regal elegance. Thousands of white orchids cascaded gracefully from the vaulted ceiling. The aisle was lined with crystal lanterns glowing softly in the afternoon light. But it was not the floral arrangements that made Julian choke on his own breath. It was the guests. The massive hall was completely full. The rows of mahogany chairs were occupied by the absolute highest echelon of power in the country. There were legendary hedge fund managers, federal judges, notoriously reclusive tech magnates, and political titans sitting in solemn, respectful silence. These were people Julian had spent his entire pathetic career trying to meet. People who would never even return his phone calls or acknowledge his existence. And right now, every single one of those terrifyingly powerful billionaires was sitting perfectly still, facing forward, quietly waiting for a bride to walk down the aisle. The heavy oak doors at the back of the grand hall swung open with a resounding, echoing thud. The majestic chords of a live string quartet instantly filled the cavernous space. I stepped over the threshold, entirely illuminated by the cascading golden light of the crystal chandeliers. I was not wearing a cheap, rented dress. I was draped in a breathtaking, custom-designed haute couture gown that swept across the marble floor with the heavy, undeniable weight of absolute royalty. Walking firmly beside me, holding my arm with fierce, protective pride, was my fiancé. He was not just a handsome groom. He was a senior partner at the most ruthless, formidable corporate litigation firm in the United States. The sheer shock that radiated from the back of the room was palpable. Julian, Chloe, and Eleanor turned to stone, their faces drained of all color, their jaws slackening as their brains violently rejected the reality standing right in front of them. For a brief, agonizing second, the grand hall was completely silent. Then, Chloe snapped. Her fragile ego shattered into a million jagged pieces. She could not process that the sister she had mocked and discarded was standing at the pinnacle of power. She lunged forward, her sparkling white dress rustling aggressively as she shoved past a federal judge, her face twisted into a mask of pure, unhinged rage. "You absolute fraud!" Chloe shrieked, her shrill voice echoing violently against the vaulted ceilings, disrupting the elegant music. "Who paid for this? Who are you scamming? You are a pathetic data clerk. You rented all of this just to show off. Security? Arrest this liar." I did not flinch. I stopped dead in the center of the aisle. The entire congregation of billionaires and power brokers turned to look at the screaming woman in the white dress with utter, freezing disgust. I slowly turned my head, my eyes locked onto Chloe, but I looked completely through her, as if she were nothing more than a smudge on the glass. I did not address her. I shifted my gaze directly to her husband, who was trembling uncontrollably near the entrance. "You are late for your bankruptcy hearing. Vance," I declared, my voice echoing with icy, unshakable authority. Julian gasped, taking a stumbling step backward. My fiancé gave me a knowing, supportive nod. From the front row, my chief legal counsel stood up. He walked down the aisle with slow, deliberate steps, holding a thick red folder. He reached Julian and slammed the heavy folder directly into his chest. Julian instinctively grabbed it, his hands shaking violently as he opened the cover. "Allow me to officially introduce myself," I said, my voice carrying effortlessly across the silent room. "I am the founder and sole chief executive officer of Etherian Dynamics, and you, Julian, are officially a ruined man. That obscure patent you sent your wife to steal from my apartment, it was the centerpiece of a massive federal antitrust and environmental lawsuit. By forcing me to sign it over, Chloe legally absorbed a $50 million federal fine directly into your marital assets." Julian let out a sickening, high-pitched wheeze, dropping the folder. The papers scattered across the floor, detailing his complete and utter financial annihilation. "Furthermore," I continued, my tone completely flat and devoid of mercy, "because you attempted to use that corrupted patent to secure a fraudulent supply chain contract, the federal government officially froze your entire company, your personal bank accounts, and your primary residence at precisely 8 o'clock this morning. You own absolutely nothing. You are entirely penniless, and the fraud division of the Department of Justice is currently waiting for you outside." The realization hit them like a freight train. The illusion of their elite status disintegrated into thin air. Eleanor, my own mother, suddenly fell to her knees. The heavy velvet of her dress pooled around her on the marble floor. Tears streamed down her meticulously powdered face, completely ruining her makeup. She reached out with a trembling hand, grabbing the delicate lace hem of my wedding gown. "Brinley, please," Eleanor sobbed, her voice cracking with desperate, pathetic panic. "Please, my darling daughter, you cannot do this to us. We are your family. We are your blood. Forgive us. Please." I looked down at the woman who had thrown me into the freezing dark 10 years ago to fund a vanity project. I felt no warmth, no sadness, and absolutely no hesitation. I calmly stepped back, violently ripping my dress from her grasp. I looked her dead in the eye and returned the exact words she had branded into my soul a decade prior. "Your pathetic, loser appearance is ruining my carpet," I said coldly. I raised my hand, giving a sharp, silent signal. 6 massive, heavily armed private security contractors immediately stepped out from the shadows of the grand hall. They descended upon the Vance family without a single ounce of gentleness. Julian was paralyzed, staring blankly into the void. Eleanor wailed uncontrollably. Chloe fought like a wild animal, screaming my name in absolute, terrifying despair as the guards grabbed her arms and dragged her backward toward the heavy wooden doors. I turned my back on them. I did not watch them get thrown out into the cold. I looked up at my brilliant, powerful future husband. A genuine, radiant smile finally broke across my face. I took his hand, the warmth of his grip completely erasing the last lingering chill of that long-ago Thanksgiving night. Together, we turned toward the altar, resuming our march down the aisle as the string quartet swelled back to life, surrounded by the absolute admiration and respectful silence of the true upper class. Thank you so much for listening to this story. My wonderful audience, where are you currently listening from right now? Please let me know down in the comments. If you enjoyed today's story and want to help us keep this channel alive, please consider supporting us with just $1. You can easily do this by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen, or by using the PayPal link provided in the description and the pinned comment below. Your kindness gives us the budget to pay our hardworking staff, helping them feed their families while we continue to create even better stories for you. Thank you again, and see you next time.